This video will include spoilers for all of the first 2 seasons of Code Geass and the first 5 seasons of RWBY. One of the most important things in any form of fiction is consistency. Things that need to be internally consistent world building is one of the most important. The reason for this is that should your world building crumble, your world crumbles around it. In some stories, this is the point. The very rules of reality are coming unbound. However, there are times where even the most grounded story breaks its own internal logic, and it can confuse viewers. In The Last Jedi, there is a moment at the beginning of the film where a First Order officer informs his superior, and the audience, that the X-Wing piloted by Poe Dameron cannot be hit by laser fire from the laser towers, because the X-Wing is too small, despite the former films showing us that is exactly what those towers are designed for. Has the First Order changed the design of the laser towers to make them worse than they were before? Surely not. But this is just one of the reasons that world building and the consistent use of it is integral to the success of your story. We will leave The Last Jedi behind, as our discussion today is not on sequels changing well-established rules, but on the very foundation of world building. First, we must establish what the foundation of world building is. Any story must be based somewhere. Fiction that takes place in our own world can use it as the basis. Thus avoid having to create their own world while taking advantage of the knowledge that a viewer or reader has of the world around them. Batman may be in Gotham City, but it is on an Earth very similar to our own. When the Joker attacks a bank, we will fill in the blanks without anyone having to tell us that people work there, or that there is a large supply of money located within. Other stories will leave this behind to make their own worlds, though in most cases they will carry over some of the pre-established norm from our own. Humans will still live in cities and often still have the same standards of family and morality. This is not a problem, and in fact, it often makes it much easier for the viewer or reader to immerse themselves within that world. The world may be well fleshed out, or shandified, or it might not be. The amount of world building required is vastly different depending on the type of story you were telling. Mobile suit Gundams, space colonies, giant robots, and psychic powers are all things that your average viewer does not have any tangible experience with. Time is spent explaining them. More time is then spent explaining how the events of the One-Year War have changed the outlook of the people both on Earth and in the colonies, as it has in our own world anytime a world war has been fought. This allows the viewer to sympathize with characters on both sides of the war, whether they agree with them or not. Conversely, Lord of the Rings spends a good deal of time on the culture of hobbits, giving us a firm understanding of their habits and how they differ from humans, but gives much less time to the orcs. We learn how they were created, but precious little else. Is this a flaw of the Lord of the Rings? Would the story be more enriched by spending time with a specific orc and learning more about him? I would argue no, as the story is about Frodo and the Ring, and unless that orc and Frodo had a moment of contention, the orc is subsequently unimportant to the story. We do not need to see both sides of the battle, because we know that the orcs want to kill everything and everyone. Would have been interesting, but it is not required. World building exists to set a standard and give a basis for the story to build off of. Once that floor has been set, the story is able to grow the ideas that are presented therein, in ways the viewer will both not expect and be able to expect. To go with our previous examples, if the Joker attacks a bank in Gotham City, we know that Batman will come to stop him, because it lines up with what we know of the world we have invested in. If Batman were to simply allow the Joker to steal the money from the bank, while standing by and making small talk with him, this would feel wrong, and would break your concept of the world as it has been explained to you. Now that we have broken down what the base foundation of world building is and why it is so important, we can move into the actual point of this video. A comparison of the world building in both Code Geass and RWBY, and why they are examples of the ways in which world building can make or break a story. But why specifically these two stories? They both have a shared theme of racism that permeates the entirety of their stories, and the way it affects the progression of the narrative. They both have strange powers that are nebulous at times, and they both introduce a new type of element that revolutionizes the way wars are fought. The inclusion of Saccharide and dust as ways to allow giant machines to move at high speed, or to allow for particle beams and blasts of energy. It's hard to categorize, and that there are not many restrictions placed on what they can and cannot achieve. However, both being something mined and thus requiring someone to mine it, gives us a tangible source of this magic. We know the mines exist, so it is no surprise when we hear of someone raiding them. Saccharide is a radioactive material that is extremely volatile in nature. Dust is much the same, though instead it is a powder of crystallized energy. Although I wish there were more restrictions on them both, they are mostly unobtrusive to the narrative. The Geass and semblances are far more integral to the narrative, but are more important. We will break them down individually. In Code Geass, the Geass is a strange power granted to you by a contract. This power is individual to the person who attains it, and is tied to their desires, though it can take form in a warped version of those desires. Every Geass has individual rules that bind it, and these rules cannot be broken, which causes a Geass to be much easier to defeat should you learn these rules. The Geass will grow in strength, and only those with strong wills can stop themselves from being overwhelmed by the Geass. As it grows, it may change its own rules, forcing the user to adapt and beware their own power. The power of kings, as it is known by some, the Geass is a curse that, if not restrained, will hurt all those around the owner. It is a double-edged sword that allows for unexpected answers and twists, as someone may use their Geass in a way the viewer did not see coming. Or someone may be revealed to have had a Geass all along. The Geass almost becomes a villain in and of itself at times, forcing Lelouch to do things he did not originally plan or want to do. Semblances are a strange power that everyone has access to, should they be able to use their aura to fuel it. Aura is the power of the soul. Everyone has it, but not everyone can use it. It can be used to activate semblances, shield the body from attacks, project it out into attack of its own, to heal, or even to activate someone else's aura, so that they may use a semblance. A semblance is unique to the person who has it, though there are times that the word unique is stretched. Ruby's semblance is speed and allows her to move at incredible velocity, and even allows limited flight. As her speed grows, she is able to split herself into 3 separate clusters of rose petals and then rejoin together. The amount of aura used to power a semblance, or how long it takes to regenerate your aura, are never discussed. But we see Ruby weakened after flying while carrying heavy objects, and Pyrrha tired after activating someone else's aura, so we know there is a limit. Semblances seem to be a bit scattershot in terms of usefulness. Blake can create clones of herself with her shadow semblance, which Sun and Flint can also do with their Via Sun and Killer Quartet semblances. The Schnee family all seem to share the Glyph semblance. Yang and Adam both have semblances that allow them to drastically increase their damage output, while Crows brings misfortune to those around him. There are even people that fight without semblances. We will return to semblances, as there's much more to say there, but we should tackle the final of the 3 similarities we mentioned earlier. Racism. The racism in both stories also requires some defining, so we will start with Code Geass, as we have been. In the world of Code Geass, the Britannian Empire subjugated all of Japan, and renamed it to Area 11. All Japanese citizens are now 11s. Their nation is gone, and they must do as the Britannians tell them, or die. The Britannians now live in their cities, as they live in the slums. 11s who tried to fight back have either been imprisoned, killed, or have fled to terrorist groups. They have no rights, and many turn to crime or drugs to try and carve out a place in this new world they live in. Despite this, there are a few that have become honorary Britannians, by selling out their friends and family, or by being especially chosen for their skills. These may live in the cities again, but are still not treated as a real person, and are more humored by most than anything else. The 11s that are tired of being treated this way, and the Britannians who see nothing wrong with it. This is the core dynamic of the world of Code Geass. As the rest of the world turns a blind eye, Britannia treats the 11s like worms. The world of RWBY has 2 races of humanoids, humans and Faunus. Faunus are part human and part animal, though the amount they are part animal is vastly different depending on individuals. Long ago, there was war between the 2. At the end of the war, the Faunus had won the right to live where they wanted, though many chose to live on the continent of Menagerie, which boasted a mostly Faunus population. By the time the story of RWBY takes place, Faunus are quite common throughout the 4 kingdoms, with one Faunus even holding a position as the headmaster of the most prestigious academy in Mistral. Despite this, there is a sign at a restaurant declaring they will not serve Faunus, and a Faunus student is allowed to be bullied by another student with no consequence. Faunus are given less than fair pay by the Schnee Dust Company, and the White Fang was created to protest the treatment of Faunus. This group turned violent shortly after, and will now kill indiscriminately for the sake of their ideals. On the surface, these 2 worlds share quite a few similarities. There are a few differences, however. Soccerodite is considered quite dangerous, and an explosion of a warhead built from it can level a city. Conversely, dust in all its forms seems rather safe, with a few vials of it exploding right next to our main characters without harming them. Even when large amounts of it are thrown into a foe and set off, the enemy does not seem to be affected at all. Semblances and Geass both seem to be tied to the personalities and desires of their owners, but most semblances have no drawbacks at all, while Geass are rife with them. 11s are less than human, while Faunus are oppressed in some places and respected in others. There is one other trait of the RWBY world that must be brought up, though, as it changes a bit of the context. There are monsters in the world of RWBY known as Grimm. The creatures of Grimm have a particular hunting habit. They are attracted to negative emotions. If that seems a bit nebulous, it is. We do not know the range of their senses, nor do we know if particular emotions set them off more than others. But in the world of Remnant, Grimm have been a standard, and people, both human and Faunus, become huntsmen to defend against the Grimm threat. Some Grimm seem as strong as a standard bear, while others are massive sea dragons and great birds. May have already spotted the inherent contradiction, but if not, know that we are drawing close to it. Area 11 is a pot ready to boil over, with terrorism and the response to it causing casualties and hatred on both sides. Families are torn apart as Lelouch uses it and the iron-willed Japanese that refuse to be called 11s to progress his agenda. They want one thing and one thing only: to drive out the Britannians who took their home away from them. And it should be easy to side with them on this. But throughout the series, we meet Britannians who subvert the evil Britannian image that has been set up. Suzaku Kururugi is an honorary Britannian who fights in the Britannian military and bridges the gap between the two. He wants to change the system from the inside, and in attempting to do so, meets other Britannians who not only don't hate the 11s, but sympathize with them. He is hated by Britannians who view him as lesser, and by 11s who call him a traitor, but he perseveres in an attempt to make things better, just as so many others are doing the same. As the series continues, the battles become more and more grand, but the Black Knights are still very much fueled by hatred of Britannia. Racism is so integral to the plot of Code Geass that for it to show up in the crossovers of the Super Robot Wars franchise, it needs to add its world as a secondary world to the main world of the game. The story of Code Geass cannot be told without the racism that infects it. Racism in the world of RWBY does not make logical sense. It could be argued that racism in any form does not make logical sense, but that is not the point of this video. The point is that in the world of RWBY, racism should not exist. The definition of racism is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. It is a form of hatred, stems from anger, and causes fear and bitterness. These are all negative emotions. As stated, negative emotions attract Grimm. So in a world where an activist group turned violent, where shop owners disallow Faunus, and Faunus students are bullied, there should never be peace. The Grimm should always be at the gates, slaughter in their wake. But instead, we have Grimm wandering the world, looking for people to devour, as Faunus gather in rallies to shout their discontent. These two conflicting points cannot be reconciled. They are in direct opposition to one another. A world in which hating someone summons giant scorpions would be a world where negative emotions were squashed as soon as they appeared. Bullying would be stopped as soon as it was noticed. There would be no desire to bar someone from entering your establishment, for if they got upset at you, it could bring forth untold horrors. And lest you think I'm just being dramatic, Blake being afraid of someone watching her while on a ship summoned the aforementioned massive sea dragon. One girl getting scared. An entire town is raised by Grimm, and the only negative emotions we see are children bullying other children. The huntsman may be there to fight the Grimm, but we see few huntsmen throughout the series. Why does every city not have a dedicated defense force? Mistral and Atlas have armies, but where's Veils? If you can activate semblances on people who couldn't use them before by unlocking their aura, why does anyone still have their aura locked? If a spike of fear is all it takes to murder everyone, why is humanity not hidden behind massive walls? Do they have to drug prisoners to make them happy? Who would dare to fight a war knowing that your forces could be decimated by literal monsters? There are so many interesting questions that Grimm cause that the series never even tries to address. But even without the ways Grimm could be expanded, we still have the basic problem of the Fauna Suppression. Faunus can gather to yell out how angry racism makes them. The White Fang, an organization built on vengeance for poor treatment, can have bases that are never assaulted. The Schnee Dust Company can force Faunus into indentured servitude, and Weiss can be openly racist toward Faunus, while Blake's rage burns just as bright from the other side. Carden can pull Velvet's ears and mock her for what she was born as. These last examples are even more egregious, as the Emerald Forest, home to the aforementioned giant scorpion and great bird, is located at the bottom of a cliff right beside the academy the main characters attend. The worst offender of them all, though, is the tournament, though rigged, that ends in the unfortunate death of one of the students, which sets off a panic and causes a large number of Grimm to attack. Why even have a tournament? Why fight each other at all in a world with Grimm? Grimm are attracted to negative emotions except when they aren't. They can appear at any time or place if the story requires them or if the impending fight would be cool enough. The Fauna Remnant are oppressed except when they aren't. A student can be bullied at academy and no one intervenes. But at the same time, it is completely normal for a Faunus to be headmaster of a different academy? We see the sign forbidding Faunus to enter a restaurant, but we see Faunus shop owners, stall vendors, and regular citizens seemingly as normal parts of society. This is poor world building. The rules of the world no longer make sense to us, and thus make us call every decision that is made into question. Whenever a fight breaks out, you either expect to see Grimm interfere, or expect them not to, but have no way to know which it will be. Your magic energy or your power systems can be mysterious, but the basic tenets of your world cannot. We see the White Fang commit terrible atrocities, and have no reason to sympathize with them, since these atrocities will only cause more. For the sake of argument, let us ignore the Grimm and look at how RWBY shows the racism in the world of Remnant. Carden bullies Velvet. He pulls her ears and mocks her. This is not okay. The fact that no one, including Velvet's Faunus teammate, stops it is terrible. Carden also bullies John. He makes John do his homework, turns him into an errand boy, and blackmails him. Carden is a terrible person. No one stops him from bullying either of them. John stands up for himself, and Carden then leaves him alone. We know nothing about Carden, really, so I won't spin some kind of narrative as to who he is. He's just a bully. Bullies pick on people weaker than them. Faunus or no Faunus, in Carden's sake. The No Faunus sign. Yes, a restaurant in Mistral has a sign declaring Faunus are not allowed. If Mistral was a kingdom where Faunus racism was a big problem, this would be considered normal. But Mistral has an academy called Haven. Same academy where the headmaster is a lion Faunus. But Mistral cannot be flooded with racism, since Mistral soldiers work with the Faunus from Menagerie to try and stop the White Fang. Ilya claims she had to hide the fact that she was a Faunus while going to a prep school on Atlas, but in the Vital Tournament, we see a student of the Atlas Academy Mantle who was chosen to represent Mantle while openly showing her tail. We have left consistency behind, and for every new piece of discrimination we get, we have a clear showing that it should not be there. Weiss is the most racist character that we meet, and her interactions with Blake should clue the viewer in how racism is bad. But in the episode where Blake and Weiss clash about it, Weiss remarks on how terrible Faunus are, and although Yang tells her that isn't necessarily the case, moments later RWBY high-fives her when they talk about their choice of wearing skirts in combat. As if Weiss hadn't been very demeaning to an entire race moments ago. She then declares that all Faunus are thieves and robbers, just as all trash cans are trash cans. They argue about this all day, while RWBY and Yang say nothing. Weiss talks about the literal bloodshed that had occurred between her family and Faunus, to which Blake replies that maybe they were just tired of being pushed around. Blake then runs off as everyone else lets her leave. Episodes later, Blake tries to explain that she is no longer a member of the White Fang. Weiss interrupts her, then explains she had 12 hours to think about this, and berates Blake for leaving and not trusting them. Weiss will never be racist again in the entire show. The White Fang themselves should be an interesting well of characters who have been pushed to the limits of what they can put up with, fighting against an oppression that we don't see, but by making them compelling, RWBY could have fleshed out the suppression of Faunus that it claims exists. However, nearly all White Fang members are simply evil, out to kill all humans or generic mooks. The good White Fang members have all left, leaving us no one to sympathize with. We even see White Fang members attacking and hurting other Faunus, in both the attack on Gira and in sending Grimm to attack Beacon, where Faunus students reside. The only White Fang member we could sympathize with, Ilya, leaves the White Fang and was only with them because her parents were killed in a cave-in and people laughed about it, which, like Carden, just proves those kids are jerks. but is a good enough reason for a grief-stricken person to latch onto. Conversely, the Black Knights question Zero's orders time and again, as his goals seem to line up less and less with their own. This all leads to the moment they meet with Schneisel, and he reveals who Zero is. Finding out that Lelouch is Britannian does not stop them, as Tamaki declares his loyalty to Zero. But it is the reveal of Lucius Geass that pushes them over the edge. Learning that Lucius Geass controlled Euphemia and caused the deaths of countless of their people enrages them. They no longer know who of them has been Geassed and who hasn't. They learn that he knew of the Flea warhead that just massacred countless more of their own people. They are shown images of their friends and countrymen that were Geassed by Lelouch. All of this drives an impassable gulf between them, so Ogi makes an offer. Lelouch for Japan. Lelouch would have freed Area 11, but not for the sake of Area 11. He would do it as a stepping stone for his final goal. There was no cost too high for that goal. Most of the loss of 11 lives were not even his fault, but the Black Knights have no way of knowing this, so their actions make sense according to what the world has already taught us. There is no need to tell of the terrible treatment 11s get. We see the slums ourselves. Learn that soldiers can do what they want with any 11 they meet, and see Colin's mother turn to drugs to try and make life just a little bit better. The Black Knights stayed true to their goal and never strayed from it, even if it meant betraying Zero. Crafting satisfying world building is tough and very, very easy to get wrong. How much inconsistent world building bothers you, dear viewer, is up for you to decide. That is subjective, but the inconsistencies themselves will still be there. The point of this video was not to say that RWBY is bad or even that Code Geass is good, but instead to point out just how much poor world building can impede a narrative, while well-crafted world building enriches the story. The rest of the narrative still needs to be able to build off the world building, of course, but if you have a shaky foundation, the story will struggle. We may revisit world building with more examples in the future, so let me know some that you love, or hate, or love to hate. Until next time, I've been Trey. This has been The Full Spectrum. Remember to always enjoy the full spectrum world building has to offer.